Happy New Year and welcome to the Alex Salmond Show. Today we have a special focus on Europe, not about Brexit or the European Council, but on the Council of Europe, an organisation which long predates the European Union and which has not 28 members but 47, stretching across the entire continent from east to west. Today we find out what it is, what it does, and why many people believe it to be both relevant and important in meeting the challenges of today and tomorrow. But first, let's hear from Tasmina with a rundown of what you can look forward to in today's Alex Salmond Show.
Thank you, Alex. We'll be hearing from Lord Dafydd Wigley, former leader of Plaid Cymru and the party's sole peer in the House of Lords here in the studio, who'll be stating his case on the importance of the Council of Europe. From Strasbourg, Alex will be interviewing lots of key players. But first, to your tweets, Facebook messages and emails. Now, the debate around Brexit, of course, rages on, and we have a tweet from Stephen Morrison who says, "Excellent show. Alex Salmond was surprisingly even-handed, allowing Kate Hoey and Nigel Evans room to air their Brexit views. A clever way to expose the fragility of their enterprise," he says. Many people have watched Alex's interview of the President of Lebanon, Michel Aoun, and we have a message here from Carol Hutton who says, "Here's hoping the Lebanese people see through Trump's falafel-stirring attempt to manipulate them, as he has done with the US reactionary xenophobic right wing. It's up to the Lebanese government to set the tone for their people and ignore Trump for the narcissist child he is." Strong views from Carla, and indeed Jacqueline, who also messages us to say, "This will be so interesting. And with regards to Trump's declaration on Jerusalem, he's a loose cannon. I can't understand how and why he's allowed to continue as president. Mind you, I can't understand how you managed to get voted in the first place." I think there are many, Jacqueline, who share your view across the world. We also have a message from Alan Meale, who attended our Christmas show where we had an audience, who says, "I'm really glad you found a new career in the media and I'm enjoying your show. Stay well, Alex, and thank you for all your many and continuing contributions to Scotland's story." Thank you. Finally, a message from Jake Laidlaw, who says, "Hello, Alex, I'm from Edinburgh. I've watched every episode of your show as it comes on." Well, thank you, Jake. "I'm proud of your show and how it deals with its issues by asking and offering both sides of a story, unlike most news broadcasters. Keep up the good work. A proud Scotsman and supporter of the Alex Salmond Show." Thank you very much indeed. And now let's hear from Lord Dafydd Wigley, who's going to state his case on the Council of Europe.
Of all the aspects of Europhobia that have been generated by Brexit, the most incredible is the hostility to the European Court of Human Rights. And I fear that the UK government shares this aversion. This is frankly ridiculous. This Strasbourg Court is no spin-off from the European Union, but established by the European Convention on Human Rights. Its aims were drafted in 1950, long before the EU was born, and one of its early supporters was Winston Churchill. Those basic human rights go to the core of European civilization. They are to protect individuals from abuse by state power, safeguards against torture, slavery, forced labour, rights to a fair trial, and freedom of conscience. European fascist regimes viciously ignored these rights, so it was vital that individual citizens could take court action against guilty governments. The European Court of Human Rights has 47 states as members, including countries such as Switzerland, Norway, and the Ukraine, way beyond the EU's 28 members. Whatever the outcome of the current Brexit debacle, surely no democratic politician can argue against such a civilised institution. Hatred of all things European threatens to drown out decent human standards. A red line must be drawn in the Brexit debate to safeguard this fundamental European institution. It's in the interests of every person throughout Europe that this be done.
Well, Lord Wigley, a warm welcome.
Thank you.
But don't the anti-Europeans have a point? I mean, what is the purpose of withdrawing from the European Union to get out from under the Luxembourg Court and then staying under the jurisdiction of the court in Strasbourg?
Well, I, of course, would like to remain in Europe and both courts to be applicable, but they are two totally different courts. The court in Strasbourg deals with fundamental rights. It extends way beyond the 28 countries, and it was something established after World War II to avoid the sort of happenings that we experienced in Europe during the years of fascism. And that is something that we should always be aware of and awake to. And therefore, the fight to maintain a system that protects citizens in countries that could be vulnerable to that is mightily important.
But you're not seriously suggesting that if the UK withdrew from the jurisdiction of the Strasbourg Court, that fundamental liberties in this country wouldn't be protected by the Supreme Court in London?
Well, there are times when one has doubts about any court, including, of course, the court at Strasbourg. It doesn't always get it right. But I want to see Britain, the United Kingdom, and particularly Wales and Scotland, in a system that ensures those rights for all our colleagues in Europe, and not just in the European Union. It is so important because once you start getting a rotten apple in any box, that can start affecting the rest. And therefore, we want to ensure that there's a generality of fair play and human rights running throughout our continent.
But surely Theresa May's opposition to the Strasbourg Court is based on her experience as Home Secretary, when she was frustrated that she wasn't allowed to deport people because of daft rulings about their domestic animals and pets.
Well, of course, and there may well have been daft rulings, although in that context I think it was massively misinterpreted and wrongly projected in the media. But you don't throw out a whole system, of courts, just because one ruling may have gone wrong. And in any case, I can't help but feel that Theresa May has been playing this for political purposes. She's now in a position where she wants to make sure that she can carry some of the pro-European wing of her party with her, and therefore, as a token, she is reversing her position with regard to the Strasbourg Court.
So do you suspect that she could reverse again? That once Brexit's safely out of the way, then her opposition to the court in Strasbourg, to the European Convention, to the Parliamentary Assembly, could re-emerge?
Most certainly. I think that her feelings are very fundamental feelings. It's as if somebody has trodden on her susceptibilities and she wants to put a boot in, and she can't do so now. But there will come a time when she may well try to, assuming that she lasts the course. But I think the argument is much wider than that. It's in terms of our rights throughout these islands and throughout our continent, and we've got to stand by those.
And what would be the impact on the devolved positions in Scotland and Wales if at some point in the future there was to be a UK withdrawal from the jurisdiction of the Strasbourg Court?
Well, of course, that assumes that Scotland and Wales are still an integrated part of the UK. Scotland and Wales are in a slightly different position because Scotland has its own legal system, and there have been a records of cases arising from Scotland. I know you yourself had a run-in as First Minister in that context. But Scotland and Wales will have to make their own course for the future, and I would hope that Scotland and Wales, whatever their relationship with London is, that they would be fully supportive of the European Court of Human Rights.
But then, well, let's take my own experience and your experience in Welsh politics. I mean, if I remember correctly, the Scottish Government lost the case on internal sanitation of prison cells at Peterhead Prison, and we were forced to rebuild Peterhead Prison. I mean, is this something that you should be ordered to do by a court in Strasbourg says, look, rebuild that prison because we're not satisfied with the potty availability for prisoners?
Well, I think there is a question of the standard at which you hold people in prison, not just in Scotland, but particularly in Wales and England at this point in time. It is just not good enough. Human decency should be respected, even if people are paying the price by losing their freedom and being locked up. The fact that a European court may have directed this must make you think whether perhaps Scotland itself should have addressed the issue first.
In terms of the future, I mean, very few people in this country know the difference between the European Court in Luxembourg and the Strasbourg Court on Human Rights. Very few people even know of the existence of the Parliamentary Assembly in Strasbourg. Can something which is so relatively unknown, which is regularly in the press confused with the European Union itself, can something so unknown really be so important?
Well, you asked the question, to what extent do people in these islands know the details of the court that take different decisions and operate the law here? It's not something that people talk about in their everyday lives, but it's important that the human rights element particularly is there as a safeguard. It is the backdrop to which people can revert when things go wrong within their own jurisdictions. And I think for that reason it needs to be available too.
Lord Wigley, are you confident that your case for retaining UK membership or Scotland and Welsh membership of the European Convention will succeed?
Well, if it doesn't succeed, we'd have to reinvent it, because it's so important, not only in our own terms, but in the terms of all our fellow citizens in Europe.
Dafydd Wigley, thank you very much. Now, before you go, as a New Year gift, this is a quaich, Gaelic for a loving cup. Whisky in there, none of that Welsh stuff, only Scotch.
We have excellent Welsh whisky, but I will obey that, and I'm very, very grateful for this gift and also for the opportunity to talk with you.
Lord Wigley, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So Lord Wigley is confident about the future of the Council of Europe. But what are the key players saying across the continent? Coming up after the break, I've been to Strasbourg to find out. The Palais de l'Europe in Strasbourg, headquarters of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, an organisation which is 70 years old, but virtually unknown, but one which has fundamentally changed the lives of tens of millions of European citizens and changed them for the better. Now, this organisation, indeed the whole continent of Europe, doesn't have its problems to seek just now. So the Council of Europe, are its best days behind it, or are the greatest achievements still to come? Out of the carnage of World War, the Council of Europe was formed to uphold human rights and the rule of international law. It has 47 member states, covers 820 million people, and now operates on a budget of approximately €500 million. Senator Alice Mary Higgins represents the European Women's Lobby on socio-economic issues in Brussels. She also happens to be the daughter of Irish Uachtaráin, or President Michael D. Higgins. Well, Senator Higgins, we're here in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. I mean, many people point to some fairly obvious abuses of the Convention by members of this Parliamentary Assembly, by countries which are in membership. Do you think that these breaches are a huge problem, or do the breaches illustrate that at least there is a code which people have to operate?
I do believe that it is under challenge and it is under erosion on a global level, outside of simply the European Court of Human Rights. For example, some of the narrative we see in Europe now, we see a discussion of citizens' rights, but of course human rights is a wider thing, and human rights is something that is about principle and not simply about a privilege of membership. So I do think we need to underscore and protect absolutely the European Court of Human Rights and that idea of common standards in human rights and how they might be enforced. And I know that the European Court of Human Rights has played an often challenging role in my own country in pressing in laws in certain areas around reproductive rights, around LGBT rights, and it's been a very useful pressure for us nationally. So I would be a strong defender of the importance of that, but I would absolutely be under no illusion that it's not under attack and under a threat of erosion. In terms of the wider sense of the Convention and breaches of the Convention, I know that we are seeing more and more breaches of the Convention, and there is a challenge for the entire Council of Europe structure now to discuss what sanctions are appropriate or not appropriate, how do we deal with breaches of the Convention.
And as a parliamentarian, as an individual member of the Parliamentary Assembly, do you have some frustration at the sentiments which you've expressed, which are shared by many of the individual members, are somehow incapable of being reflected in the institutions? Would this be a frustration you share just now, or do you think that can be amended and changed?
The year in which I have been part of the Council of Europe has, of course, been rocked by very serious concerns about corruption, about the question of vote rigging, about the transparency of institutions, about appropriate actions at high levels. So naturally I'm concerned about the institutions, but certainly in my year here I have met very passionate parliamentarians from a wide range of political backgrounds who are consistently and robustly pushing forward for better practices.
Alice Mary Higgins, thank you very much for your crack. Dutch politician Thierry Cox is chairman of the party of the European Left in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. He has some very clear-cut ideas, about what the Council should be trying to achieve. What's the bones of your report, Tini?
It's the most far-reaching convention with regard to human rights and the rule of law and democracy that has ever been drafted. And it has been adopted, and adopted means that we also have a court on human rights here in Strasbourg, that if you feel that you are hurt in your human rights, you can finally apply to this court, and the verdicts of this court are binding.
So it's difficult to crystallise 65 years into a few phrases, but how would you assess? I mean, has the progress been substantial, or has it been disappointing?
We have drafted and accepted, finally, I mean the member states of the Council of Europe, over 200 conventions. Many of them are totally unknown, but most relevant and intervene in the daily life of 835 million European citizens.
In a phrase, Tini Cox, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future of this organisation and what it can do for the future of Europe?
I am obliged to be an optimist, because otherwise there are very good reasons to be a pessimist, but I also think that in the end both our governments and our parliaments will realize that a convention-based system where you have a flexible position of governments and of parliaments to join or not to join is of utmost value for a democratic and a rule of law based Europe.
What happens when member states flagrantly ignore or breach these conventions?
Yeah. In this huge Europe, it is very difficult to find rules that can be applied immediately from Vladivostok to Greenland. So every member state and every parliament and every government has the right to decide whether and when to join a convention. It's a far more flexible system than the European Union. That's one rule for all, and we now have seen that also creates problems. It even gave the majority of the English voters the conviction that they had to get out of the European Union. The system of the Council of Europe is far more flexible, but as you probably say, to implement it is not easy. The verdicts of the European Court on Human Rights, they are binding, and in the end, most member states do indeed live up to their obligations. It takes a lot of time, and we have some bad customers here. Turkey is a bad customer at this moment. Russia always has been a bad customer, Ukraine, but also Italy, and sometimes the United Kingdom. They do not do what they have promised to second the verdicts of the court.
And most recently Spain, the situation in Catalonia, where quite clearly there were a flagrant abuse of Article 30 of the Convention on Human Rights, the right of freedom of expression. And yet the Secretary-General of this body was talking about the Spanish Constitution, the unity of Spain, which is not the business of the Secretary-General of the European, of the Convention of PACE, but is the business of this organisation should be the implementation of the Convention rights. Now, I know that many members feel that, but isn't there a frustration that even within this body there's confusion about what it should be doing in terms of pursuing the ideals and the established foundation documents?
Spain. In my report, I explain that Spain is special with regard to the convention, because after the end of fascism and Francoism in Spain, the new Spain, first adopted the European Convention of Human Rights. Only a year later it adopted a new democratic constitution. So our Convention on Human Rights is enshrined in the constitutional system of Spain. We have democracy in our member states, and we have the rule of law. We have a constitution, and we have the will of the people. These things do not always go along. There are confrontations, there's nothing wrong with that, that's democracy. The rule of law has to be applied, but we also have to listen to the will of the people.
What do you believe in this report to point the way to making the organisation more effective for its next 65 years?
Our heads of state and government have to decide whether they think that we should maintain this system that has served so many people so well in the past 65 years, and if we want to maintain it and to continue it, our governments have to put their money where their mouth is.
Well, let's hope so. Glad talking to you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
The bad customers Tini Cox refers to could include key member states such as Russia, Turkey, the UK and Spain. Russia's voting rights were revoked in 2014 after the illegal annexation of Crimea. The Secretary General of the Council has warned that Moscow could crash out of the group if Russia keeps being excluded from the election of key personnel. Turkey could be expelled from the Council of Europe if President Erdogan pursued his threat of reintroducing capital punishment following the coup attempt. Meanwhile, the UK is under pressure to accept Strasbourg court rulings on prisoners' voting rights, while the acting president of the Parliamentary Assembly launched an outspoken attack on Spanish state police violence against the people of Catalonia last October. Sir Alan Meale was a member of the Council of Europe for over 18 years until the end of last year, and thus the longest-serving member of the UK delegation. What changes has he witnessed during these years? Well, Sir Alan Meale, you've been a member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe for 18 years. I mean, that is a quarter of the entire lifetime of this Parliamentary Assembly. What are the changes that you've seen over that substantial period of time?
Well, there have been major changes. There's the introduction of countries into the community which had never been there before, countries which had been largely internationally written off as individual nations, and I think that's one of the biggest things that has caused the changes.
Of course, the Council of Europe, and in particular the Parliamentary Assembly, has always been a preparatory course for joining the European Union. I think I'm right in saying there's never been a new country, an accession country into the European Union who hasn't first been a member of the Council of Europe.
If people just take their minds back to what Europe was like, where the Iron Curtain throughout, we had all these different individual countries which were run by the Soviet state, and so on and so forth. What you've had is this emergence of a whole panoply of different organisations and, of course, countries getting independence and acting. It's been the only route into Europe. And, of course, the Council of Europe is not just about those small number of nations which are members of the European Union. It's about the 47 members of the Council of Europe area in the greater European area.
But what about all these breaches of the rules of the Convention on Human Rights manifest in many of the member states? I mean, a lot of concentration on Russia, but you could look at Turkey, we could look recently at Spain, fairly flagrant violations of the European Convention. I mean, people are entitled to ask, what is the Council of Europe doing about this violation of its own founding statute?
Well, people should not consider that all these violations take place only in new emerging countries. I mean, violations frequently occur. There's been one or two investigations into the UK and practices in there, and of course there is on a continuous basis throughout the European area. But, you know, it's about what you do about that, how you train, how you help people to do it. You don't just say you are a member and therefore go on, because there are different systems, different values.
Occasionally we hear their voices in the UK saying, look, this Convention of Human Rights, this Strasbourg court shouldn't have jurisdiction over the courts of England or the courts of Scotland even. This is something which is causing a burdensome meddling in our affairs. What would you say to people who would like in the UK to opt out of the Convention?
Well, I don't think that they should. Well, they could opt out of the Convention, but as far as anything goes, if they do that, they won't be in the Council of Europe or the European community at all. They'll be ostracised. I mean, the reality is that much of our modern-day law is based on those principles, and the best example of that is on capital punishment. You know, if you were to stay in and adapt all the policies, but change your mind on capital punishment and said you believed in, you're out.
But if you and I had been speaking a couple of years ago, we would have found it, both of us would have found it unlikely, almost incredible, that the United Kingdom would be in the process of Brexit from the European Union. Is it inconceivable that the same forces will go the whole hog and turn their back on the Council of Europe and the European Convention on Human Rights as well?
You know, in democracy, it's the most difficult thing in the world. You have tyranny, dictatorship, feudalism, and you have democracy. The last one is the hard one. And if you look back to the start principle of democracy, formed, you know, on the Greek concept of the Aleph Democrat. Well, you know, on that system of democracy they operated there was pluralism. They believed that the more educated you were, the more votes you got, which to me seems the most undemocratic thing I've ever heard. However, you know, what we've got to do is try to forge democracy on a whole series of principles that we can all live with. and actually fight to achieve.
Sir Alan Meale, it's been great talking to you.
Best of luck.
Some great insights from Alex and his guests in Strasbourg. Here are some of my thoughts. Recently, the new UK Secretary of Defence called for the summary execution without trial or indeed judicial process of UK citizens who had been fighting for the Daesh terrorists. If such a policy were ever to be adopted, it would make the UK the legal pariahs of Europe and would surely almost certainly end in their expulsion from the Council of Europe. All of which, of course, could be dismissed as the spoutings of a novice minister, if it had not been for the fact that his much more experienced predecessor called for effectively the same thing before other events overtook Michael Fallon and ended his ministerial career. The Prime Minister herself has been thought to favour the ending of the jurisdiction of the Strasbourg Court over the judicial systems of the United Kingdom. Indeed, it is thought that her own preferred policy would have been to remain in the European Union and exit the Council of Europe, rather than exiting the European Union and remaining in the Council of Europe. Ironically, it is Brexit which has secured the UK within the Strasbourg institutions, as even some fervent Brexiteers believe that staying within the Council of Europe emphasises the point that the UK is leaving the European Union and not Europe. But has the UK really reached the level where an institution forged out of the fires and carnage of World War with the United Kingdom in the vanguard of its creation is seen at best as a tactical necessity for the time being? Perhaps the time has come for a renewed emphasis on the substantial role and purpose of the Council of Europe, the one political institution which can be genuinely said to unite a troubled continent. So from Alex and all of the team here at the Alex Salmond Show in our first edition of the new year, thank you for watching. We hope to see you next week.